The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Pentagon's secure briefing room as Colonel Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform jacket one final time. At 38, she had earned every stripe and star through blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights in war zones most people couldn't even pronounce. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the kind of steel that came from making life-or-death decisions in the heat of battle. She walked down the sterile corridor, her polished boots clicking against the marble floor with military precision. The weight of the red classified folder in her briefcase felt heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. Inside those documents lay information so sensitive that only 12 people in the entire world had clearance to read them. And today, she would be the one delivering the briefing that could change everything. The door to briefing room Alpha 7 stood before her, guarded by 2 Marines who snapped to attention as she approached. She nodded respectfully, showed her credentials, and stepped inside. The room was already filled with some of the most decorated military personnel in the country. Generals, admirals, and special operations commanders sat around a massive oak table that had witnessed countless strategic discussions over the decades. But it was the group of Navy SEALs seated at the far end of the table that caught her attention. Their casual confidence filled the room like smoke, and she could feel their eyes evaluating her the moment she entered. These were America's elite warriors, men who had seen action in every corner of the globe, and their reputation preceded them into every room they entered. At the head of their group sat Commander Jake Harrison, a man whose legend was whispered in military circles from Coronado to Quantico. At 42, he had led more successful missions than most soldiers could dream of. His weathered face bore the subtle scars of combat, and his piercing blue eyes had seen things that would break lesser men. His broad shoulders and muscled frame spoke of years of intense physical training, and the rows of medals on his dress uniform told a story of valor that few could match. Sarah took her seat at the head of the table, placing her briefcase beside her with deliberate care. The room gradually fell silent as the various conversations died down, all eyes turning toward her. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken question that hung in the air like a challenge. What could this Army colonel possibly tell them that they didn't already know? General Morrison, a grizzled veteran with silver hair and kind eyes, stood to make the introductions. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Colonel Sarah Mitchell. She'll be briefing us on Operation Silent Thunder today." His voice carried the authority of decades of command, but Sarah noticed the slight hesitation in his tone. Even he wasn't fully aware of what she was about to reveal. Commander Harrison leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. A slight smirk played at the corners of his mouth as he looked her up and down with barely concealed amusement. "With all due respect, General," he said, his voice carrying the confident drawl of someone who had never been told no, "what exactly can an Army colonel tell us about naval operations that we don't already know?" The room fell silent. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the challenge that had just been thrown down. Sarah felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced countless times when facing down enemy combatants who underestimated her because of her gender or assumed her rank meant she was just another desk officer. She stood slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. Her fingers found the combination lock on her briefcase, and the soft clicking sound seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Commander Harrison," she said, her voice steady and professional, "I understand your concern. In your position, I might ask the same question." Harrison's smirk widened slightly. "Oh, I'm sure you understand a lot of things, Colonel. But understanding and experiencing are two very different things. How many combat deployments have you actually completed? How many times have you had to make split-second decisions with enemy fire raining down around you?" The other SEALs chuckled quietly, a sound that rippled through their section of the room like a stone dropped in still water. Sarah noticed the way they looked at her, not with outright hostility, but with the kind of polite dismissal reserved for someone they considered out of their league. To them, she was just another Pentagon briefer, someone who would show them PowerPoint slides and talk about strategies they had already lived through firsthand. "Actually, Commander," Sarah replied, opening her briefcase with practiced ease, "I've completed 14 combat deployments across 4 different theaters of operation. I've led ground operations in Afghanistan, coordinated airstrikes in Syria, and spent 3 years embedded with Special Forces units and operations so classified that they don't officially exist. The room's energy shifted slightly. Harrison's smirk faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. Impressive resume, Colonel. But this is about maritime operations. This is about understanding the ocean, understanding how SEALs operate in environments that would kill most soldiers before they even got their feet wet. Sarah pulled out a thick manila folder marked with red tape and multiple security stamps. The sight of it caused several officers to lean forward in their chairs. Red classified documents were rare, seen only by those with the highest possible security clearances. The fact that she was carrying them meant this briefing was far more significant than anyone had initially realized. "You're absolutely right, Commander," she said, setting the folder on the table with deliberate care. "Maritime operations require a unique understanding of ocean environments, underwater navigation, and amphibious assault tactics, which is why I spent 2 years training with the Navy's underwater demolition teams before they became SEALs, and another 18 months cross-training with your predecessor units in Vietnam." The chuckling stopped abruptly. Harrison's confident expression began to crack around the edges, like ice under pressure. The other SEALs exchanged glances, suddenly unsure of the ground they were standing on. Vietnam was sacred territory for military special operations. Anyone who had served there, especially in the early special operations units, commanded automatic respect. General Morrison cleared his throat, his eyes moving between Sarah and Harrison with growing interest. "Colonel Mitchell, perhaps you could elaborate on your background for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with your service record." Sarah nodded, her hands folded professionally in front of her. "Of course, General. I enlisted in 1985 at the age of 18, initially as a communications specialist. But I volunteered for every advanced training program available, every cross-training opportunity, every assignment that would push my limits. I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment, completed the Army's Special Forces qualification course, and was one of the first women to successfully complete the Navy's combat diving supervisor course." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "I've rappelled from helicopters into hostile territory, conducted underwater reconnaissance missions in enemy harbors, and coordinated joint operations between multiple branches of the military in situations where failure meant death for dozens of American service members." Commander Harrison's face had gone from amused to serious to something approaching concerned. The woman standing before him was clearly not the typical Pentagon briefer he had expected. Her calm confidence suggested someone who had earned her position through fire and blood, not politics and paperwork. "But most importantly," Sarah continued, her voice growing slightly harder, "I've spent the last 3 years developing contingency plans for scenarios that keep the Joint Chiefs of Staff awake at night. Scenarios involving threats that most of you have never even heard of, because the information is so classified that acknowledging these threats exist would cause international incidents." She opened a red folder, revealing documents marked with security classifications that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "The operation we're discussing today involved a threat to American national security that is immediate, unprecedented, and requires the kind of coordinated response that has never been attempted before. And yes, Commander Harrison, it will require SEALs to operate in environments and situations that even your extensive training may not have prepared you for." The room was now completely silent. Harrison's earlier confidence had evaporated like morning mist, replaced by the focused attention of a professional warrior who recognized that he might be out of his depth. The other officers leaned forward, suddenly, understanding that this briefing would be unlike anything they had experienced before. Sarah's green eyes met Harrison's blue ones across the table. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. This was no longer about rank or gender or service rivalry. This was about something far more serious, something that would test every skill and every ounce of courage that every person in that room possessed. "Now," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "shall we begin discussing Operation Silent Thunder? Because, gentlemen, what I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about warfare and everything you thought you knew about what our enemies are capable of." She lifted the first document from the folder, a satellite photograph that showed something so unexpected, so impossible, that when the officers around the table saw it, several of them actually gasped audibly. Harrison's face went pale as he stared at the image. Finally, beginning to understand that the woman he had mocked just minutes earlier might be the only person in the room qualified to lead them through what was coming. The photograph showed a massive underwater installation, clearly artificial, in waters that were supposed to be empty ocean. But it wasn't the installation itself that had captured everyone's attention. It was what appeared to be moving around it, shapes that were too large and too organized to be natural, too advanced to belong to any known military force. This photograph was taken 72 hours ago by one of our most advanced reconnaissance satellites, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. The installation you see is located in international waters, approximately 200 miles off the coast of California. It wasn't there a week ago. Commander Harrison found his voice, though it came out rougher than usual. "Colonel, what exactly are we looking at?" Sarah's expression was grim as she met his eyes. "Commander, we're looking at what appears to be an underwater base of unknown origin, built with technology that our best scientists can't identify, and operated by forces that we don't understand. And, according to our intelligence, they've been monitoring and recording every naval exercise, every submarine patrol, and every coastal defense system we have." The implications of her words hit the room like a physical blow. If an unknown force had been observing American military operations from an underwater base, the security breach was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Every operational plan, every defense strategy, every classified movement of American naval forces could be compromised. "How long have they been watching us?" General Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah turned to the next page in her folder, revealing a timeline that made everyone's blood run cold. "Based on our analysis of unusual underwater activity, we believe they've been in position for at least 6 months, possibly longer." The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. 6 months of compromised operations, 6 months of unknown observers recording American military capabilities, 6 months of potential intelligence gathering by forces whose intentions and capabilities were completely unknown. Commander Harrison's earlier arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by the focused intensity of a warrior facing an unprecedented threat. "Colonel," he said, his voice now respectful and serious, "what do you need from us?" Sarah's slight smile held no humor, only the grim satisfaction of a soldier who had finally been given the resources she needed to face an impossible mission. "Commander, I need your SEALs to do something that has never been attempted before. I need you to conduct an underwater reconnaissance mission on a target that may be defended by technology we don't understand, staffed by forces we can't identify, and located in an environment that will test every limit of human endurance and tactical skill." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each officer present. "Gentlemen, we are potentially facing the first contact with a force that possesses capabilities beyond our current understanding. This is not a drill, this is not a training exercise, and this is not a situation that any of us have been trained for. But if we don't act quickly and decisively, this unknown force will have complete intelligence on our naval capabilities, and we'll be fighting a war where the enemy knows everything about us while we know nothing about them." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of understanding that their world had just changed forever. Commander Harrison looked at the woman he had mocked just minutes earlier, seeing her now for what she truly was, not just a colonel delivering a briefing, but a warrior who had been given the impossible task of defending America against something that shouldn't exist. And in that moment, every person in that room understood that their lives, their careers, and possibly the fate of their country now depended on working together to face a threat that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare, about the ocean, and about what was possible in their carefully ordered military world. The emergency briefing continued as Colonel Sarah Mitchell spread additional photographs across the secure table. Each image revealed more disturbing details about the underwater installation that had appeared seemingly overnight in international waters. The assembled military leaders studied the evidence with growing alarm, their earlier assumptions about routine operations completely shattered. Commander Jake Harrison leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by intense professional focus. The underwater photographs showed geometric patterns that defied conventional military architecture. Curved surfaces that seemed to bend light itself, support structures that appear to be grown rather than built, and energy signatures that their most advanced sensors couldn't properly interpret. "Colonel," Harrison said, his voice stripped of any remaining arrogance, I've seen a lot of underwater installations during my career. Russian submarine bases, Chinese research facilities, even some of our own black sites. But this doesn't look like anything human-made. Sarah nodded grimly, appreciating his honesty. That's exactly what our analysis team concluded, Commander. The construction materials appear to be some kind of metallic compound that we can't identify. The power source generates energy readings that exceed anything in our current technology base. And the geometric design principles don't match any known engineering methods. General Morrison studied a close-up photograph that showed what appeared to be a docking area. Strange vessels were partially visible in the underwater bays, their sleek designs unlike any submarine or underwater vehicle in any military's inventory. How did our satellite surveillance miss the construction of something this massive? That's one of the most disturbing aspects of this situation, Sarah replied, pulling out another classified document. Our continuous satellite monitoring of this area shows nothing unusual until 72 hours ago. Either this installation was built with technology that can hide from our most advanced surveillance systems, or it was constructed somewhere else and moved here intact. The implications sent a chill through the room. Moving an installation of this size would require engineering capabilities far beyond anything currently available to any nation on Earth. The alternative, technology that could render such a massive construction invisible to American satellites, was equally unsettling. Captain Rebecca Torres, the Navy's senior intelligence officer present, spoke up from her position near the far wall. Colonel Mitchell, have we confirmed whether this installation is inhabited? Are we looking at an unmanned research station or an active military base? Sarah's expression grew even more serious as she opened another section of her classified folder. Captain Torres, that brings us to the most critical aspect of this situation. Yesterday at 0400 hours, one of our attack submarines conducting routine patrol operations detected unusual acoustic signatures coming from the installation. She activated a secure audio system built into the briefing table, and an eerie sound filled the room. It was unlike anything the military personnel had ever heard, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed almost organic, combined with mechanical tones that created harmonics no human-designed equipment would produce. This recording was made by the USS Hampton during a covert approach to the installation, Sarah explained as the haunting sounds continued to play. What you're hearing has been analyzed by our best cryptologists, acoustic specialists, and even marine biologists. Their unanimous conclusion is that these sounds represent some form of communication. Commander Harrison's face had grown pale as he listened to the alien-sounding transmissions. Colonel, are you telling us that we're dealing with non-human intelligence? Sarah met his gaze directly, her green eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Commander, I'm telling you that we're dealing with intelligence of unknown origin using technology that exceeds our current understanding. Whether that intelligence is human, non-human, or something else entirely is beyond our current ability to determine. The room fell silent except for the continuing playback of the mysterious acoustic signatures. Each pulse and tone seemed to drive home the reality that they were facing something completely outside their experience and training. These were warriors who had faced every conceivable human threat, but the possibility of non-human intelligence operating in Earth's oceans was a scenario that no amount of military training could have prepared them for. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, a Marine officer with extensive combat experience, raised his hand slightly. Colonel Mitchell, what has been the response from higher command? Does the President know about this situation? Sarah's pause before answering told them everything they needed to know about the political sensitivity of the situation. The President has been briefed on the existence of the installation. However, the full implications of what we've discovered are being treated as the highest possible security classification. Only the people in this room and a select few others have access to the complete intelligence picture. She pulled out another document, this one bearing so many security stamps and classifications that several officers had to lean forward to see it properly. What I'm about to share with you goes beyond classified. It's compartmentalized intelligence that could trigger international incidents if it became public knowledge. The room's tension ratcheted up another notch as Sarah opened the document to reveal surveillance photographs, taken from an entirely different angle. These images showed the ocean surface above the mysterious installation, and what they revealed made several officers gasp audibly. 3 days ago, commercial fishing vessels in the area reported unusual water disturbances, Sarah explained, pointing to swirling patterns visible in the ocean surface photographs. The fishing boats described whirlpools that appeared and disappeared without warning, sudden temperature changes in the water, and schools of fish behaving in ways that local fishermen had never seen before. Captain Torres studied the surface disturbance patterns with growing alarm. "Colonel, these whirlpools are massive. The energy required to create water disturbances of this magnitude would be enormous." "Exactly right, Captain. And that's not the most disturbing part." Sarah turned to a new page, revealing photographs that showed several of the fishing vessels listing heavily to one side, their crews clearly struggling to maintain control. Two of the fishing boats reported that their instruments went completely haywire when they approached the disturbance area. Compasses spinning wildly, GPS systems showing impossible locations, and sonar equipment detecting depth readings that don't match known ocean floor topography. Commander Harrison examined the images of the struggling fishing vessels with the eye of someone who understood maritime operations. "Colonel, electromagnetic interference on this scale would require an incredibly powerful energy source. Whatever's down there is operating technology that we can't begin to understand." "That assessment matches our technical analysis," Sarah confirmed. "But the electromagnetic interference is just one of several phenomena we've detected." She pulled out yet another classified photograph, this one showing what appeared to be a massive disturbance in the water column itself. "This image was captured by our most advanced underwater surveillance drone during a reconnaissance mission 2 days ago," she explained. "What you're seeing is a column of superheated water rising from the installation toward the surface. The temperature differential is so extreme that it's creating its own weather patterns in the immediate area." General Morrison studied the thermal imaging with growing concern. Superheated water on this scale could indicate either geothermal activity or some kind of artificial energy process. Given the artificial nature of the installation, I'm assuming we're looking at the latter. "Your assumption is correct, General. The thermal output from this installation exceeds anything we've ever recorded from human-built facilities. The energy being generated down there could power a major city, yet it appears to be completely self-contained with no external power sources that we can identify." Sarah's briefing continued to reveal layer after layer of disturbing information. Each new detail painted a picture of technology and capabilities that challenged every assumption about what was possible in the world's oceans. The assembled military leaders found themselves confronting the possibility that everything they thought they knew about maritime security was suddenly obsolete. "The most immediate concern," Sarah continued, "is that this installation appears to be actively monitoring our naval operations. Every time we've moved submarines or surface vessels through the area, the acoustic activity from the installation has increased dramatically." She played another audio recording, this one clearly showing the mysterious communications becoming more intense and frequent when American vessels approached. "This pattern suggests not just awareness of our presence, but active intelligence gathering and possibly communication with other unknown installations or vessels." Commander Harrison's tactical mind was already working through the implications. "Colonel, if they've been monitoring our operations for months, they potentially have detailed intelligence on our submarine patrol patterns, our communication frequencies, and our operational capabilities." "That's exactly what we're afraid of, Commander. And it gets worse." Sarah opened the final section of her classified briefing materials, revealing intelligence reports that made the earlier revelations seem almost mundane by comparison. "We've detected similar installations in 2 other locations," she announced, causing an audible intake of breath from around the room. "One in the South Pacific near international shipping lanes, and another in the North Atlantic approximately 400 miles from our East Coast naval facilities." The strategic implications hit every officer in the room like a physical blow. 3 unknown installations positioned to monitor America's primary naval operating areas represented a security breach of unimaginable proportions. If hostile forces had been observing American naval operations from these positions, virtually every classified operation conducted in the past 6 months could be compromised. Captain Torres was the first to find her voice. "Colonel, are all 3 installations identical in design and capability?" "Based on our limited reconnaissance, yes. Same technology signatures, same acoustic patterns, same electromagnetic interference profiles. Whatever intelligence is behind these installations has the capability to construct and deploy multiple facilities simultaneously while avoiding detection by our most advanced surveillance systems. General Morrison's face had gone ashen as he contemplated the full scope of the threat. Colonel Mitchell, in your assessment, what are we dealing with? What kind of force has the capability to construct underwater installations using unknown technology, deploy them undetected in strategic locations, and monitor our operations without being discovered for months? Sarah's pause before answering stretched the tension in the room to its breaking point. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had spent weeks analyzing intelligence that challenged everything she thought she understood about national security. General, we're dealing with an intelligence that possesses technology decades ahead of our most advanced capabilities, the resources to deploy major installations without detection, and the strategic sophistication to position these facilities for maximum intelligence gathering efficiency. Whether this intelligence is human, non-human, or something else entirely, it represents a threat level that we have never encountered before. The room fell silent as the full implications of her words sank in. Every officer present understood that they were potentially facing a first contact scenario with capabilities that could render conventional military strategy obsolete. The comfortable assumptions about American technological superiority and maritime security had been shattered in the space of a single briefing. Commander Harrison looked at the woman who had just revealed the most significant intelligence development in modern military history. His earlier mockery seemed not just inappropriate, but almost absurd in hindsight. "Colonel Mitchell," he said quietly, "what do you need us to do?" Sarah's expression was grim, but determined as she looked around the room at the assembled military leadership. "Gentlemen, we need to develop operational plans for scenarios that have never been contemplated before. We need to prepare for underwater reconnaissance missions on targets that may be defended by unknown technology. And we need to do it all while maintaining absolute operational security. Because if word of these installations becomes public, it could trigger panic that would destabilize governments worldwide." The weight of responsibility settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These were warriors accustomed to facing impossible odds, but the challenge before them was unlike anything in military history. They would be operating against an unknown enemy with superior technology in an environment where conventional tactics might prove useless, with the security of their nation hanging in the balance. And leading them through this unprecedented challenge would be the Army colonel that Commander Harrison had dismissed just hours earlier. A woman whose quiet competence and classified knowledge had just proven to be exactly what they needed to face the impossible. Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood at the head of the briefing table, watching as the assembled military leaders absorbed the magnitude of what they were facing. The silence stretched for long moments as each officer contemplated the implications of underwater installations with unknown technology positioned to monitor America's most sensitive naval operations. Commander Harrison was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying none of the casual confidence that had marked his earlier comments. "Colonel, you mentioned that we need to develop operational plans for unprecedented scenarios. What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah opened a new section of her classified materials, revealing detailed tactical maps and technical specifications. "Commander, we're looking at a three-phase operation that will require capabilities from multiple branches of the military, coordinated in ways that have never been attempted before." She pointed to the first map, showing the location of the primary installation off the California coast. Phase 1 involves close-range reconnaissance using modified diving equipment and underwater vehicles specifically adapted for this mission. We need to determine the exact nature of these installations, their defensive capabilities, and, most importantly, whether they pose an immediate threat to American interests. General Morrison studied the tactical overview with growing concern. "Colonel, sending personnel for close reconnaissance on targets with unknown defensive capabilities could be sending them into a death trap. How do we assess the risk?" "That's exactly why this mission requires SEALs," Sarah replied, looking directly at Commander Harrison. "Your teams are trained for underwater operations in hostile environments, but this situation requires modifications to standard procedures that push the boundaries of what's considered possible." She pulled out technical specifications for equipment that made several officers lean forward in surprise. The diving systems shown in the documents were unlike anything in standard military inventory. Suits designed to operate at extreme depths with enhanced shielding against electromagnetic interference, breathing apparatus that could function in environments where conventional equipment might fail, and communication systems that used quantum encryption to prevent interception. These specialized systems were developed in classified programs over the past 18 months, Sarah explained, noting the surprised expressions around the table. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency has been working on contingency equipment for scenarios that we hoped would never occur. Unfortunately, that hope has proven to be overly optimistic. Captain Torres examined the technical specifications with the eye of someone familiar with advanced military equipment. Colonel, these systems appear to be designed for environments that don't exist in normal underwater operations. The shielding specifications suggest protection against energy types that aren't generated by conventional technology. Your observation is correct, Captain. The equipment was designed based on theoretical threats that our scientists believed might be encountered if we ever faced technology significantly more advanced than our own. Sarah's expression was grim as she continued. What we're facing appears to validate their most concerning theoretical models. Lieutenant Colonel Webb raised his hand slightly. Colonel Mitchell, what intelligence do we have about the defensive capabilities of these installations? Are we sending teams into a reconnaissance mission or a combat situation? Sarah paused before answering, consulting a document marked with security classifications that exceeded even the previous materials. Marcus, that's one of the most critical unknowns in this entire situation. We've detected energy signatures that could represent defensive systems, but we have no way to determine their nature or capabilities without closer examination. She pulled out a series of photographs that showed energy readings from the installations, represented as colorful overlays on the underwater images. The patterns were beautiful in their complexity, but deeply unsettling in their implications. Spiraling energy fields surrounded each installation like protective barriers, pulsing with rhythms that seemed almost alive. These energy fields appear to extend approximately 500 meters from each installation, Sarah explained, pointing to the colorful patterns in the photographs. Our analysis suggests they might represent some form of protective barrier, but we can't determine whether they're designed to keep things out, keep things in, or serve some entirely different purpose. Commander Harrison studied the energy field patterns with the tactical mind of someone who had spent years analyzing enemy defensive positions. Colonel, these patterns don't look random. There's a mathematical precision to the way these fields pulse and shift. This suggests intelligent design and active control. Exactly right, Commander. Which brings us to one of the most disturbing aspects of our intelligence. Sarah opened another document, this one containing analysis reports from the military's most advanced artificial intelligence systems. We've run these energy patterns through every cryptographic and pattern analysis system we have. The unanimous conclusion is that these fields represent some form of communication or computational system. The implications sent another chill through the room. If the defensive fields around the installations were actually computational systems, it suggested a level of technological integration that exceeded anything in human experience. The installations weren't just protected by energy barriers. They were surrounded by thinking, processing, communicating systems that could potentially adapt to any threat. Phase 2 of the operation, Sarah continued, moving to the next tactical map, involves establishing communication protocols with whatever intelligence is operating these installations. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. The idea of attempting communication with an unknown intelligence was outside the normal parameters of military operations, venturing into territory that belonged more to diplomatic missions than special operations. General Morrison was the first to voice the obvious concern. Colonel, attempting communication assumes that we're dealing with rational actors who might be interested in peaceful contact. What if we're facing hostile forces that interpret any approach as an act of aggression? Sarah's expression was grave as she addressed the general's concern. Sir, that's exactly why Phase 2 requires the most careful planning and execution in military history. We're essentially attempting first contact with an unknown intelligence while maintaining defensive readiness for the possibility that contact could trigger hostile responses. She pulled out communication protocols that had been developed by teams of linguists, cryptographers, and xenobiologists working in programs so classified that most of the officers in the room were learning about their existence for the first time. Mathematical sequences, universal physical constants, and symbolic representations designed to convey peaceful intent to any intelligence capable of understanding logical concepts. These communication protocols were developed based on theoretical models for first contact scenarios, Sarah explained, watching as the officers examined the complex symbolic systems. The assumption is that any intelligence capable of constructing installations of this technological sophistication would also be capable of recognizing mathematical and physical concepts that represent universal truths. Commander Harrison examined the communication protocols with growing fascination and concern. "Colonel, this is incredible work, but it's also incredibly dangerous. If we attempt communication and the response is hostile, we could be triggering a conflict with an enemy whose capabilities we can't assess or counter." "That's exactly why Phase 3 exists," Sarah replied, pulling out the final section of tactical plans. "If communication attempts fail or produce hostile responses, we need contingency plans for scenarios ranging from strategic withdrawal to active defense of American territorial waters." The Phase 3 documents contained military planning unlike anything the officers had ever seen. Defensive scenarios that assumed enemy capabilities far exceeding conventional threats, evacuation plans for coastal populations, and coordination protocols with international allies for threats that transcended national boundaries. "Phase 3 assumes the worst-case scenario," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent weeks contemplating possibilities that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare. "If we're facing hostile intelligence with superior technology, conventional military strategy becomes largely irrelevant. We would be fighting a war where our enemies have advantages in every category: technology, intelligence, and possibly numbers." The silence that followed was profound. Every officer in the room understood warfare, but the scenarios Sarah was describing represented challenges that no military force in human history had ever faced. Fighting an enemy with superior technology was difficult but manageable. Fighting an enemy with unknown technology was exponentially more challenging. Fighting an enemy with unknown technology and unknown motivations was entering territory where military science became speculation. Captain Torres spoke up, her voice carefully controlled. "Colonel Mitchell, in your assessment, what are the chances that we're dealing with human intelligence using captured or reverse-engineered alien technology versus actual non-human intelligence operating these installations?" Sarah consulted her classified documents before answering. "Captain, our analysis teams have considered both possibilities extensively. The technological capabilities demonstrated by these installations exceed anything in human development by such a significant margin that either explanation represents a fundamental shift in the global balance of power." She pulled out comparative analysis charts that showed the technology gap between the installations and America's most advanced systems. The differences were staggering: energy output that exceeded nuclear reactors, material science that appeared to violate known physical principles, and computational systems that processed information at rates that challenged understanding of what was possible with any known technology. Whether we're dealing with human forces using technology acquired from unknown sources or actual non-human intelligence, the tactical challenges remain essentially the same, Sarah continued. "We're facing capabilities that our current military doctrine cannot address using conventional methods." Commander Harrison looked around the room at his fellow officers, seeing his own concerns reflected in their expressions. "Colonel, when you say conventional methods, are you suggesting that we need to develop entirely new approaches to military operations?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Commander. Everything we think we know about underwater warfare, about intelligence gathering, about defensive strategy, may be obsolete when facing this level of technological superiority." Sarah's voice carried the grim authority of someone who had spent weeks confronting impossible realities. She pulled out the final set of documents, marked with security classifications that made everyone in the room understand they were crossing into territory that few humans had ever accessed. "What I'm about to show you represents contingency planning that goes beyond anything in standard military doctrine. These are strategies for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior forces, developed by teams that have been preparing for scenarios that we hoped would never occur." The documents contained tactical approaches that challenged every assumption about how warfare should be conducted. Guerrilla tactics adapted for underwater environments, technology adaptation strategies that assumed access to captured enemy equipment, and coordination protocols with civilian populations for scenarios where traditional military organization might prove inadequate. The reality we're facing, Sarah said, looking around the room at the assembled military leadership, is that we may need to fundamentally reimagine what it means to defend America. If these installations represent the advance guard of a larger presence, we could be looking at a situation where our conventional military advantages become irrelevant overnight. The weight of that possibility settled over the room like a suffocating presence. These were officers who had devoted their lives to protecting America using military force and strategic planning. The possibility that their training, their experience, and their weapons might prove inadequate against unknown threats was a challenge to everything they had built their careers upon. But as they looked at the evidence spread across the table, at the photographs of installations that shouldn't exist, and energy readings that defied explanation, every officer in the room began to understand that they were facing a moment that would define not just their careers, but possibly the future of human civilization. And the woman leading them through this unprecedented challenge was someone that one of them had dismissed as just another Pentagon briefer less than 2 hours ago, a mistake that now seemed not just arrogant, but potentially catastrophic in its implications for everything that was about to unfold. The emergency briefing had stretched into its 4th hour when Colonel Sarah Mitchell pulled out a secure tablet that required biometric authentication to access. The assembled military leaders watched as she pressed her thumb to the scanner and waited for the red light to turn green, indicating access to materials classified beyond anything they had seen so far. "What I'm about to share with you requires individual security acknowledgement," she announced, producing documents that each officer would need to sign personally. "This information is compartmentalized at levels that exist above top secret, and unauthorized disclosure could result in charges of treason." Commander Harrison accepted his copy of the security acknowledgement form, noting that it contained warnings more severe than anything he had encountered in 20 years of special operations. The document made it clear that the information he was about to receive involved national security matters of the highest possible importance, with penalties that included life imprisonment for any breach of security. After each officer had signed and submitted their acknowledgement forms, Sarah activated the secured tablet. The screen displayed satellite imagery that made everyone lean forward in their chairs, despite having already seen hours of disturbing intelligence. This footage showed the ocean surface above all 3 known installations simultaneously, recorded during a time-synchronized surveillance operation. This footage was recorded 18 hours ago during a coordinated intelligence-gathering mission, Sarah explained, her voice carrying new weight as she prepared to reveal information that would change everything. "What you're about to see represents the most significant development in this situation since we first detected the installations." The satellite footage began to play, showing the 3 installation sites from a high-altitude perspective. At first, the images appeared normal, vast expanses of ocean with subtle surface disturbances marking the locations of the underwater facilities. But as the timestamp advanced, something unprecedented began to occur. "Watch the water surface above each installation," Sarah instructed, pointing to specific areas on the screen. "Pay particular attention to the synchronization of what you're about to witness." Suddenly, all 3 installation sites began to show dramatic changes simultaneously. The water above each facility started to glow with an eerie blue-green light that penetrated up from the depths, creating circles of illumination that were visible even from satellite altitude. The synchronized timing of these events across thousands of miles of ocean suggested a level of coordination that sent chills through every observer. The illumination events lasted exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds at each location, Sarah reported, pausing the footage at the moment of maximum brightness. The synchronized timing suggests real-time communication between installations separated by vast distances, using technology that operates faster than any communication system we possess. General Morrison studied the synchronized illumination patterns with growing alarm. "Colonel, this level of coordination across such distances would require communication systems that exceed our most advanced capabilities. What kind of technology are we looking at?" "That's exactly the question that led to our most disturbing discovery," Sarah replied, advancing the tablet to display technical analysis of the illumination events. "Our scientists have analyzed the light emissions and discovered that they're not random illumination. They're information transmission systems using frequencies and modulation patterns that we've never encountered before." The technical analysis showed that the glowing water was actually carrying massive amounts of encoded information, transmitted using light frequencies that created the visible illumination as a byproduct. The data transmission rates exceeded anything possible with human technology, suggesting computational capabilities that challenged understanding of what was physically possible. Captain Torres examined the technical specifications with growing concern. Colonel, information transmission at these rates would require computational systems more advanced than anything we know of. Are we looking at artificial intelligence systems? Sarah's pause before answering stretched the tension in the room. Captain, we're looking at intelligence systems that process information at rates that exceed our most optimistic projections for artificial intelligence development. Whether these systems are artificial, biological, or something else entirely is beyond our current ability to determine. She advanced to the next section of classified intelligence, revealing information that made the previous revelations seem almost routine. But the information transmission was just the beginning of what we recorded during this surveillance operation. The satellite footage continued, showing the aftermath of the synchronized illumination events. As the blue-green glow began to fade from the water surface, new phenomena began to manifest at each installation site. The ocean surface above each facility started to show geometric patterns that appeared to be rising from the depths. Complex designs that looked like massive symbols or communication markers visible from space. These surface patterns appeared exactly 47 minutes after the illumination events ended, Sarah explained, displaying close-up imagery of the geometric designs. Each pattern is over 2 miles in diameter and consists of lines and curves that maintain perfect mathematical precision despite being created in moving ocean water. The patterns were beautiful and terrifying in their implications. Complex geometric designs that appear to be drawn on the ocean surface using some form of technology that could manipulate water itself. The mathematical precision of the patterns suggested intelligence that could control natural forces with capabilities that exceeded anything in human experience. Lieutenant Colonel Webb was the first to grasp the full implications of what they were seeing. Colonel, these patterns aren't random. They're showing us that whatever intelligence is operating these installations can manipulate the ocean environment itself as a communication medium. Exactly right, Marcus. And the patterns contained information that our cryptographic analysis systems have been working to decode for the past 12 hours. Sarah pulled up the preliminary results of the cryptographic analysis, showing mathematical sequences and symbolic representations that had been extracted from the geometric ocean patterns. The decoded information was unlike anything the officers had ever seen. Mathematical concepts that pushed the boundaries of human understanding, physical constants that appeared to reference scientific principles not yet discovered by human science, and symbolic representations that suggested knowledge of the universe that exceeded current human capability. Our best cryptographers and theoretical physicists have been analyzing this information around the clock, Sarah continued, her voice reflecting the gravity of what she was revealing. Their preliminary conclusion is that we're looking at a form of communication that assumes knowledge of scientific principles that human science has not yet developed. Commander Harrison studied the decoded mathematical sequences with fascination and growing dread. Colonel, are you saying that whatever created these patterns is trying to communicate with us using science that we don't understand? That's one possibility, Commander. But there's another interpretation that's even more disturbing. Sarah pulled up a new analysis document that showed comparison charts between the decoded information and theoretical models of advanced scientific knowledge. Some of our scientists believe that these patterns aren't attempts at communication. They're demonstrations. Demonstrations of capabilities designed to show us exactly how far behind our technology and science really are. The room fell silent as the implications of that possibility sank in. If the ocean patterns were demonstrations rather than communication attempts, it suggested that whatever intelligence was behind the installations was already aware of human capabilities and was deliberately showing the vast gap between human science and their own technological development. There's more, Sarah continued, advancing to footage that showed events occurring several hours after the geometric patterns had appeared. Watch what happens to the patterns as our surveillance continued. The satellite footage showed the massive geometric designs beginning to change and evolve while maintaining their perfect mathematical precision. Lines curved into new configurations, circles expanded and contracted in complex rhythms, and entirely new patterns emerged from transformations of the original designs. The pattern evolution continued for 6 hours, Sarah explained, showing time-lapse footage that compressed the changes into minutes of viewing time. The transformations followed mathematical principles that our scientists are still trying to understand, creating designs of increasing complexity that pushed the boundaries of what we thought was possible with water manipulation. Captain Torres watched the evolving patterns with growing amazement and fear. Colonel, the energy required to maintain this level of control over ocean water for 6 hours would be enormous. We're looking at technology that can manipulate natural forces on a scale that exceeds our most powerful systems. That assessment matches our technical analysis, Sarah confirmed. But the energy output is just one aspect of what makes these demonstrations so significant. The real importance lies in what the patterns were teaching us about the intelligence behind them. She pulled up the final analysis documents, showing conclusions that have been reached by teams of scientists working in programs so classified that their existence was known only to a handful of people in the entire government. Our analysis teams believe that the evolving patterns were showing us mathematical proofs for scientific principles that human science hasn't discovered yet. The silence that followed was profound. The assembled military officers were confronting the possibility that they were dealing with intelligence that possessed scientific knowledge decades or centuries ahead of human development. The implications for military strategy, for national security, and for humanity's place in the universe were staggering. General Morrison was the first to find his voice. Colonel Mitchell, in your assessment, what does this level of demonstrated capability mean for our operational planning? Sarah's expression was grim as she addressed the general's question. Sir, it means that we're potentially facing intelligence that views human military capabilities the way we might view ancient weapons. Our most advanced systems may be essentially irrelevant against this level of technological superiority. The weight of that assessment settled over the room like a physical presence. Every officer present had devoted their careers to maintaining American military superiority, but they were now confronting the possibility that superiority itself might be an outdated concept when facing capabilities that transcended current understanding of what was possible. However, Sarah continued, her voice carrying new determination, technological superiority doesn't necessarily mean hostile intent. The fact that these installations have been observing our operations for months without taking aggressive action suggests that whatever intelligence is behind them may not view humans as immediate threats. Commander Harrison looked up from the classified documents he had been studying. Colonel, are you suggesting that the reconnaissance mission you outlined earlier might actually be an opportunity for peaceful contact rather than a military operation? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Commander. But it's also why the mission requires personnel trained for the most dangerous possible scenarios. If our assessment is wrong and we're dealing with hostile intelligence, the team conducting reconnaissance could find themselves facing threats that no amount of training can prepare them for. Sarah pulled out the final set of mission parameters, showing operational plans that represented a careful balance between peaceful contact protocols and military readiness for hostile responses. The reconnaissance mission will need to be prepared for first contact scenarios, intelligence gathering under unknown conditions, and potential combat against technologically superior forces. She looked around the room at the assembled military leadership, seeing the mix of determination and uncertainty in their expressions. Gentlemen, what we're planning has never been attempted before in human history. We're preparing to make contact with intelligence that may be centuries ahead of us technologically, while maintaining readiness to defend American interests if that contact goes wrong. The magnitude of responsibility settled over every person in the room. They were no longer just military officers planning operations against human adversaries. They were representatives of humanity preparing for potential first contact with intelligence that possessed capabilities beyond current human understanding. And leading them through this unprecedented challenge was the woman that Commander Harrison had dismissed just hours earlier as someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of naval operations, a judgment that now seemed not just wrong, but dangerously naive in light of everything she had revealed about the threats facing their nation and their world. Colonel Sarah Mitchell closed the final classified document and looked around the briefing room at faces that had been fundamentally changed by 6 hours of intelligence revelations. The assembled military leaders sat in contemplative silence, each processing the reality that their understanding of national security, maritime operations, and humanity's place in the universe have been completely transformed in a single afternoon. Commander Jake Harrison was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying none of the casual arrogance that had marked his initial interaction with Sarah. "Colonel Mitchell," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When I walked into this room today, I thought I understood what we were facing. I was wrong about everything, about the briefing, about the threat level, and, most importantly, about you." Sarah met his gaze with the quiet dignity of someone who had proven herself through competence rather than confrontation. "Commander, we're all learning to deal with scenarios that no amount of training could have prepared us for. The question now is how we move forward with the knowledge we've gained." General Morrison stood slowly, his movements reflecting the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. "Colonel, based on everything you presented today, what's your recommended timeline for implementing these operational plans?" "Sir, the installations have been active for months without showing aggressive behavior, but the synchronized demonstrations yesterday suggest that whatever intelligence is behind them may be preparing for more direct contact. We need to be ready to respond within 72 hours. The urgency of that timeline sent a ripple of tension through the room. 72 hours to prepare for first contact with unknown intelligence was an impossibly short time frame, but the evidence suggested that events were accelerating beyond their control. Captain Torres consulted her notes from the marathon briefing session. "Colonel, the specialized equipment you mentioned for the reconnaissance mission, how quickly can it be deployed to operational teams?" "The equipment is currently staged at Coronado Naval Base and can be transported to any operational location within 12 hours. However, the team selected for this mission will need intensive briefings on operational parameters that go beyond anything in standard training protocols." Sarah pulled out personnel files that she had been saving for this final phase of the briefing. The documents contained psychological profiles and capability assessments for individuals who had been selected through a process that evaluated not just military skills, but psychological stability in scenarios that challenge basic assumptions about reality. The personnel selected for this mission have been chosen based on criteria that include adaptability to unprecedented situations, psychological resilience in high-stress environments, and ability to function effectively when faced with unknowns that exceed normal human experience, she explained, handing copies of the personnel files to the senior officers present. Commander Harrison examined the files with growing respect for the thoroughness of the planning process. The selected personnel included some of the most decorated and capable special operations veterans in the military, but they had also been chosen for psychological characteristics that suggested ability to function in situations that would break down normal command and control structures. "These are exceptional people," he observed, noting the service records and psychological evaluations. "But you're asking them to operate in an environment where their training might prove inadequate, and their assumptions about warfare could be completely wrong." "That's exactly right, Commander. Which is why the mission briefings for the selected personnel will need to be as comprehensive as what you've experienced today. They need to understand that they're potentially making first contact with intelligence that could rewrite our understanding of what's possible in the universe." Sarah activated the secure communications system built into the briefing room, connecting to encrypted channels that would allow coordination with other classified facilities. The next phase of this operation requires coordination with multiple government agencies, international allies, and scientific institutions that have been preparing for scenarios like this one. The screens around the room activated, showing secure connections to facilities that most of the assembled officers didn't know existed. The Strategic Scientific Reserve, the Anomalous Phenomena Investigation Unit, and the Theoretical Threat Assessment Division, government programs that have been operating in secret, preparing for possibilities that traditional military planning couldn't address. "Ladies and gentlemen," said a voice from one of the secure connections, "this is Dr. Elizabeth Chun from the Strategic Scientific Reserve. We've been monitoring the installation activities from our facility and can confirm that the technological capabilities demonstrated exceed our most optimistic projections for advanced human development." Additional voices joined the conversation from secure facilities around the country. Scientists, intelligence analysts, and military planners who have been working on contingency plans for scenarios that they hoped would never occur. Their collective expertise represented humanity's best attempt to prepare for contact with intelligence that possessed superior technology. The coordination requirements for this operation extend beyond traditional military channels, Sarah explained to the assembled officers. We're dealing with a situation that requires input from theoretical physicists, xenobiologists, cryptographers, and experts in fields that didn't exist when most of our operational doctrine was developed. General Morrison listened to the multi-channel conversation with growing understanding of the complexity involved in the operation they were planning. Colonel, this level of interagency coordination represents challenges that go beyond military planning. How do we maintain operational security while involving so many different organizations? That's one of the most critical aspects of this operation, General. Everyone involved has been cleared for compartmentalized information access, and communication protocols have been designed to minimize the risk of intelligence leaks while maintaining the coordination necessary for success. Sarah pulled up organizational charts that showed the command structure for an operation unlike anything attempted before. Military personnel would provide operational capabilities, scientists would provide technical analysis and communication protocols, intelligence agencies would handle information security, and diplomatic personnel would manage international coordination. The complexity of this operation reflects the unprecedented nature of what we're attempting, she continued. We're essentially preparing for every scenario from peaceful first contact to defense against superior technology, while maintaining readiness to adapt to possibilities that we haven't even considered. Commander Harrison studied the operational structure with the tactical mind of someone who had led complex multi-agency operations in hostile environments. Colonel, this organizational complexity introduces multiple points of potential failure. How do we maintain mission effectiveness with so many different chains of command? That's exactly why the Field Operational Command needs to rest with personnel who have experience in both military operations and interagency coordination. People who can make tactical decisions while understanding the broader implications of first contact scenarios. Sarah's implication was clear. The mission would require leadership from someone with experience in classified programs that most military officers had never heard of. Someone who understood both military operations and the scientific, diplomatic, and intelligence considerations involved in potential first contact. The secure communications channels continued to provide input from facilities around the country, each contributing specialized expertise to the operational planning. The coordination requirements were staggering, but the assembled personnel represented the best preparation humanity could mount for scenarios that challenged every assumption about what was possible. There's one final aspect of this situation that we need to address, Sarah said, pulling up satellite imagery that showed recent developments at all three installation sites. The synchronized demonstrations we recorded yesterday appear to have been preliminary to more significant activities. The new satellite footage showed increased energy signatures at all three installations, with the underwater facilities showing patterns of activity that suggested preparation for something major. The electromagnetic interference had intensified, the acoustic signatures had become more complex, and, most disturbing of all, the installations appeared to be growing. Our analysis suggests that the installations are expanding their physical presence, Sarah explained, pointing to structural changes visible in the underwater imagery. New sections are being added using the same unknown technology, and the energy output from each facility has increased by over 300% in the past 24 hours. The implications hit every officer in the room simultaneously. If the installations were expanding and increasing their activity levels, it suggested that whatever intelligence was behind them was moving to a new phase of operations. The period of passive observation might be ending, replaced by something more active and potentially more dangerous. Captain Torres studied the expanding installation imagery with growing alarm. Colonel, if these facilities continue to grow at the current rate, they could become major underwater cities within weeks. We could be looking at colonization rather than simple monitoring. That possibility is exactly why we need to implement the reconnaissance mission immediately, Sarah replied. We need to understand what these installations are becoming before they reach a size and capability level that makes any kind of human response ineffective. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the possibility that they might be witnessing the beginning of colonization by intelligence with technology centuries ahead of human development. The idea challenged every assumption about humanity's control over Earth's oceans and raised questions about what humanity's future role might be in a world where they were no longer the dominant intelligence. Commander Harrison looked at the woman who had revealed the most significant intelligence development in human history, finally, understanding the full scope of what she had been tasked with managing. "Colonel Mitchell," he said quietly, "when you walked into this room 6 hours ago, you knew that you were about to change everything we thought we understood about our world." Sarah nodded, her expression reflecting the weight of knowledge that had been hers to carry before anyone else understood the magnitude of what they were facing. "Commander, I've been living with this intelligence for 3 weeks, working with teams that have been preparing for possibilities that we hoped would never occur. Today was the first time I could share the burden of this knowledge with people who have the operational capability to respond to it." She looked around the room at the assembled military leaders, seeing the mix of determination and uncertainty that she had been carrying alone for weeks. "The question we face now is whether humanity is ready for first contact with intelligence that possesses capabilities we don't understand, intentions we can't predict, and technology that could render our military advantages obsolete overnight." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of understanding that their decisions over the next 72 hours could determine not just American national security, but humanity's future relationship with intelligence that had just demonstrated its presence in Earth's oceans. And as the assembled officers began the complex process of translating intelligence into action, they did so with the knowledge that their guide through this unprecedented challenge was the woman that one of them had dismissed just hours earlier as someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of their world, a judgment that now seemed not just wrong, but tragically naive given everything she had revealed about the new reality they all faced together.